Welcome back to the Growing Band Director Podcast. This is episode number 207. I'm here with Brian Rabuse. Brian, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Beautiful. I love meeting people that knew Jeff Smith, and I knew Jeff Smith, and now, like, through Jeff, I'm meeting all this other community of people. You're the band director at Waukeona Regional High School in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, a very rural school district, and you're a jazz guitar major who is a band director. Looking forward to this session on everything guitar to help all of us dummies, just get more out of our players and our gear and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think everyone has their specialty, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some of us are oboe players, and I don't know too much about the oboe, right? So sure.
I will say, for anybody listening only, if you want to see probably the most in-depth audio technical setup that we've had on any of the 200 something episodes, go on YouTube and check out the video, because you can see, because Brian, you have, how many is it? 5 guitars and 2 amplifiers and a mixer. I mean, there's just a lot happening. I appreciate all of the work and getting it ready. I know, going back to Jeff, you mentioned as we were talking, like, how would Jeff do this, right?
That's right. That being a student teacher with Jeff, the influence is so strong. I tend to think, when I'm struggling a little bit, what would Jeff's approach be? Or if I'm a little uncomfortable, like doing a podcast like this, I've never done a podcast like this before, so I wanted to be prepared. How would Jeff do it? And I always do that. And I'm in year 28, and I'm still getting back to that mindset that he was so fond
I love
of.
that. Excelsior Music Publishing is proud to sponsor the Growing Band Director Podcast with a roster of imaginative composers, including composers who have been featured on this podcast, such as Carol Britton Chambers, Laura Estes, and Tyler Arcari. Excelsior Music Publishing provides new music for concert band, jazz ensemble, solo and ensemble, as well as books and resources for all levels and occasions, including a large and festive selection of music for your fall, holiday, and Christmas concerts. Find your perfect next piece at excelsiormusic.com. That's EXCELCIA music.com. When we were talking off air, you mentioned a bit of advice that he gave you about your teaching style and where you are. I was hoping you could share that with our audience.
Sure. When I was student teaching with him, I was starting to get the hang of it. And he said, what I do here in my school district works here in Norwalk. Wherever you go, whatever your style may work there, but you may have to adjust. You can't teach like this just anywhere. You have to respond to your students. And if your students aren't responding, it's time to look in the mirror, because it's not them, it's you. You have to change your teaching style so that the students are responding the way you want them to respond.
I love that. And that's something we all need to hear.
Yeah.
So I know you said one of the most common questions you get, as probably anywhere you go, you're like the band director guitar expert. You're like, oh, I know that guy who plays guitar. Let me ask him. So we're going to kind of hit some of these most common questions and solutions right out of the gate here. So what kind of guitar should I get for my band? Right?
Yeah, that question comes up all the time. And I do see in a lot of social media forums just quick textbook answers that, get a Fender Strat, or get a Gibson L5 or a 335. And some of these answers, that may be a great jazz guitar, but is it worth it? Do you need to spend $3,000 on a guitar? Probably not. And if you buy a specific jazz guitar, one for jazz, do you have a modern band program? Because you won't be able to use that instrument in there to much effect. So I find what most band directors are looking for is an affordable guitar that's of decent quality and can be diverse. You can play clean with it, you can play rock and roll with it, and you can play jazz with it. And there are plenty of guitars out there that where you can do that. So I'm a fan of Fender, but all lines of guitars kind of work like this. Gibson works like this. It's very much like buying a clarinet. Like, if you're going to buy a clarinet, someone would say, oh, well, get a buffet, get an R13, you'll be all set. But you're talking big money. And if what you want to do is play in high school, that includes going to football games, that may not be the right instrument, even though it's a superior clarinet, right? So in Fender, you'll probably see this name, Squier. Squier is sort of a Fender company. They're the low end of Fender. The brand name is, actually Squier, but they're designed by Fender. So all of these instruments are made in Indonesia and in China. There's a pretty low level called the Bullet series, and there's another one too, but Sonic. Yeah, so the Bullet and the Sonic. I would avoid those really at all costs. They're about $200 and they're made of poor building materials. They will likely break and they're not set up well. What I mean by that is when it costs money to actually set the guitar up, not just put the pieces together, but to balance the intonation and to maybe file the frets so they're not sharp on the side. And they save money by not doing those things. So if you buy one of these really low-level Bullet or Sonic guitars, you will probably be disappointed and you will have to put some money into it to make it playable. The next level up in Fender after the Bullet is the Affinity. And I actually have one of those here.
My good friend Trent Austin started Austin Custom Brass so many years ago. You can call him at 816-410-0826. They ship all over the world. They have a shop in Kansas City, Missouri, and they really are an amazing sponsor of this podcast. They do trumpets, trombones, euphoniums, tubas, mouthpieces, and more, all the way from the beginner to the professional. Austin Custom Brass has worked with thousands of brass players from around the world, and you can check them out on www.austincustombrass.biz. Whether you're a student, a band director, a parent, or a player, Austin Custom Brass is your place to go for all your brass playing needs. Austin Custom Brass works with band programs from all over the country. They can provide a bid to you today. They can work within your school's budget, and they accept POs. Call their team today at 816-410-0826. Austin Custom Brass is an amazing resource for brass players and great humans, great people. You'll love working with them. Give them a call.
It looks exactly the same. It says Affinity up in the top there, in the very end of the headstock. And these guitars have really nice wood. The neck is really nice. They've dressed the frets properly. The finish is excellent. The pickups are great. Where they have saved money is, you can see that this is missing a knob already. This is a student's guitar. The knob just fell off. They saved money by like cheaping out on the screws. This switch is probably going to break. This input jack is made of cheap plastic. They've saved a lot of money by cheaping out on some things like, the tuners. On these Affinity guitars, if you buy an Affinity guitar, it's going to be about $200 to $250 to buy one of these. You'll want to just upgrade the tuning pegs, and that's a $50 upgrade right there. But for about $400, maybe less, $350, $400, you can get one of these. And this is really, it's the same, basically the same wood. I think that's poplar and this is pine. This is the Classic Vibe series. So Fender was really, they kind of put their name on the map back in the 50s and 60s when they came out with these solid body guitars that were affordable and sounded great. And just as rock and roll was dawning, right, people were playing these guitars. So Squier has sort of reproduced that guitar, and they call it the Classic Vibe 1950s or the Classic Vibe 1960s. And they're made to those specs. And the build quality is much better. They come from the factory set up, tuned, the intonation is all adjusted right, the necks feel good, although later we can talk about how people can do that themselves. It's not that hard. The tuning pegs are really good quality. I would gig with this guitar. This is like a $400 guitar, and if I had to play a professional gig, I would not be disappointed by playing this guitar.
And is that a guitar that you can get different sounds out of and play in different styles?
Sure, let me play a little bit for you here. So this is just a clean sound. Right, so I'm pretty happy here. It's just in tune. And you can also, with just this clean sound, you can get your jazz settings too. Right? I don't think many adjudicators would complain about that sounding too rock and roll, right? And part of the thing that I'm doing here on this is I'm using this pickup switch. So on all guitars, all electric guitars that have multiple pickups, you're able to turn them on and off. So this switch is engaging this front pickup. They call this the neck pickup because it's closest to the neck. That gives you your really mellow sounds, right? So now if I go to the middle position, I've engaged both pickups. It's going to get a little brighter because this pickup gets a little bit more treble because it's closer to the bridge where the strings attach. A little more punch there, right? And then if I go all the way to the bridge position, it's really trebly. You probably wouldn't want to use that in a jazz setting. It's a little too bright. But in a rock setting, if you were to put, now we've got pep band music all day long. You can use this in your modern band. It's fairly quiet. It's responsive, right? So knowing how those switches work and adding effects to that can be fun. But that's a basic setup. Now, these two pickups too, they are the polarity of the magnets. Just a basic crash course on how this works. These are magnets. Guitars don't have any power in them. So there's a magnet wrapped with copper wire, just like a microphone. So when you speak into a microphone, you're moving that diaphragm copper wire and you're sending signal down your microphone cable that goes into an amplifier. This is just a magnet, but this string has a high iron content. So when I vibrate that string within the magnetic field, I'm basically doing the same thing, and I'm creating a low voltage signal that I can send out of the output jack. So the position of the pickup and where it is will give you a certain sound. Now, this pickup is, I think this is north polarized and this is south polarized. So when I'm in the middle position, they cancel each other out as far as hum goes. A lot of times, and I'm not getting it today, but if I'm in this solo up position here in the neck, sometimes you can get a little bit of a hum, a little 60 cycle or some sort of hum. If I do this, it goes away because this pickup cancels out the hum from this pickup. You'll get a little signal loss. And then sometimes this can be in a noisy position. I'm not getting much today. So, so it's pretty good.
So for the people who are listening only and not watching, the two pickups, one was by the bridge, one was by the neck. The one by the neck is the warmer tone. You can combine them for the middle, and then they're brighter. And that's the Affinity series from Fender.
This is the classic vibe, but the Affinity works just the same way. So the classic vibe, I think, to answer that, give the short answer, if somebody said, what guitar should I get for my program? It would be this. I would go with the classic vibe. This is a classic vibe 50s from Squier. The next step up would be the Mexican-made Fenders. So the difference is that it wouldn't say Squier on the neck. I have an example of that.
We will get right back to our content, but I wanted to thank you for being such an amazing band director, that you're taking your time and listening to a band director podcast. There's many options out there, and I appreciate you very much taking in this content. I hope that you understand that your students are very lucky to have you as their band director, that you're continuing to grow, and that they are going to benefit from your improved skills as a band director. You can share this episode with any band director friends or other music education friends who can learn from this content, because good pedagogy is good pedagogy. And if you could take a moment and go to thegrowingbanddirector.com, and you'll be able to sign up on our Patreon platform to give at least $5 or $3 a month. And it helps the content continue to be created for you to help our profession grow. Let's go back to our scheduled episode. I think that's great. As you're getting that, you have one that's going to be $400, and so that's pretty affordable for what you're looking to do. What's the price range now as you go into this next one?
This is $1,000, and I've had this for a while. It's pretty beat up, but it does say Fender on it. So I think a lot of people just go bananas over, oh, well, it's a Fender, so that's a better quality. It's true. It is better. And this is actually an American made. If you can see on the bottom under the word Fender, it says made in USA. Mm-hmm. So today, this guitar would probably be $1,300 to $1,400, but I got it 20 years ago.
So what's obviously it's a little better built. Yes. Right. So what is the bonus of having that for an average school program, or especially thinking about their jazz program, is that worth getting 3 of the other guitars?
No, I would get 3 of the any day.
Okay.
But as far as a guitar that I just love to play, this feels so good in my hands. The build quality is just excellent, and I've had it for a very long time. Remember I told you about the humbucking thing? These two pickups wound together do that by itself. Yep. So this is a north pickup and this is a south pickup. So this double coil pickup that's built in here, that bucks the hum and cancels all the noise. This is a 5-way switch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This would be
Is it
this pickup by itself.
the same concept that goes from warmest to brightest?
Correct. Exactly
Great.
the same. And different phase cancellation points.
I have another
And-
question for you, specifically
Sure.
jazz band related.
Yeah.
If you're looking to basically be like a really high-end jazz program, say you're doing EE, or you're looking for that, you're willing to spend a couple $1,000s or whatever it is, and you're looking for jazz only, what do you recommend?
I got your ticket right here. You want a hollow body or a semi-hollow body. This is a Guild X500. I've also set this up, this Guild X500. That's our school bell.
Oh, any teacher understands the school bell.
Yeah. It's a D. I've done a couple things here. First, this is going to give you the sound of the masters, right? You'll sound like Wes Montgomery. You'll sound like George Benson. You're going to take a step in that direction. Kenny Burrell. This is the instrument that those guys played. Very much in the same venue as if you wanted to sound like Bruce Springsteen, you would get a Telecaster. Or if you wanted to sound like Slash, you'd get a Les Paul, right? Because those are the guitars that they play. So the masters played a semi-hollow body like this with this pickup configuration and this string tension. So a big difference is the strings themselves. These are flat wound strings. So typically a string is a core of wire and another round core of wire is wrapped around it. So it looks like a big spring. And if you drag your fingernail down it, it'll make like a raspy sound. These strings are flat wound. So imagine the same round core, but imagine a piece of linguine as wire. It's flat. And you wrap that all the way around and there are no seams. So that creates a really mellow, I'll go up to the camera, but you probably can't see. I mean, they look like guitar strings, but those are flat wound strings. Yeah. So you can find those in any guitar store. The gauge of these strings is fairly heavy too. That's a kind of a jazz indicator to kind of get that classic sound. Guitar strings are gauged by the highest string, the E string. On all my electrics for my modern band class, I have 10s. This is set up with 13s. So the 13s are much thicker, and they won't bend out of tune when you put a lot of pressure on them, like when you're holding out these big wide chords, right? That's a big finger buster, big stretch there. That on lighter strings, just because you're pushing so hard, you might bend those strings out of tune. But you won't be able to do any rock and roll bends on this thing. Not really good at all.
Okay.
But this guitar has
yeah, what sort of settings would we want to use?
Yeah. One of the great things about these jazz guitars, you'll probably see this pretty common, is 2 pickups. So there's one in the neck position, one in the bridge position. They're both double coils. And I have an independent volume and an independent tone for each pickup. So with this switch, I can turn both pickups on. This switch, this is a master volume. So just imagine that at the front of the guitar, there's a volume, one ring to rule them all, right? So I can dial in my settings. And then with this master volume, I can just turn everything down.
Brian, can you remind me of the name of the guitar again?
Oh, this is a Guild X500.
X500. Okay, that's what I forgot. Yep. Great. Beautiful. Love it. Yep. So what does that run typically?
This was $1,800 when I bought it new. Yeah. It's a 1978. I've had it appraised at $3,000.
You know, it's funny because sometimes as band directors, we say, you know what? I want to spend a chunk of money this year on something that's really good, yeah. Right? So you're saying if we're mainly a jazz band school, like my big band, we do very little rock and roll. You know, it's 90% swing, yep. You know, but I can have my kids sound great on that $400 guitar. You
can. But then again, you want to remember that your jazz band is mostly your horns, right? You've got 15 horns in your band. So the guitar isn't really a featured instrument.
Yeah.
We're going to do like one of those Pat Metheny charts where you're really featuring the guitar.
Yeah, yeah.
The sonic subtle, it's kind of like this. So imagine, you know, you've got your buffet R13 and you're playing in a marching band. So you're not going to hear the sonic differences, the subtle tonal differences that a guitar like this will offer. So it might really be lost unless you're playing in a combo situation. Now, you had said, you know, if you have a student who's really interested in moving along in guitar, maybe going to major in music and guitar, and maybe has to do an audition, you're probably going to want to pull the trigger on something like this.
Okay.
Right.
But you're saying that $400 guitar is not going to hold back probably any jazz band.
No, it won't. No, I think
Okay.
as a rhythm section, pulling your Freddie Green chords and strumming along and getting along well with your piano player and bass player and fitting in the mix appropriately, I
Right.
can't see any adjudicator giving you a ding on a point for playing a Telecaster in a jazz band. There's a wonderful guitar player instructor. He wrote basically he wrote the Bible of chord studies for jazz guitar. It's called Chord Chemistry, and the guitarist's name is Ted Green. Green with an E on the end. If you Google him and look for some of his stuff, you'll find that he plays a Telecaster just like that exclusively all the time. He's played gigs with it. He's written his books. He teaches with it. It's his #1 instrument. So,
Great.
you know, it really is a fantastic instrument. So you don't need to spend $3,000 to have your guitar in your jazz band. These guitars too, they can be fussy. You really have to take care of them. They're made of wood. So if the humidity gets too high, the wood can expand. Right? If it gets too dry, if the humidity gets too low, like 12% humidity will destroy your guitar. The finish will crack, the wood will just kind of shrink up. It's not good.
I will say they look really cool.
They do look really cool.
I feel like if you put that in front of the rhythm section, it's like, hey, we're really good. Check out what this guitar looks like. Yeah. Can we move our way into amps and different things we can do on our amps with our settings and things?
One last thing on this. One of the reasons solid body guitars can be better in many cases than hollow body guitars is that this guitar can feed back a lot because it's hollow. So what I've done is I've stuffed it with some foam so that acoustically it's not as loud. So when I turn the volume off, right, and I'm strumming away, you can still hear it. It's not as loud, but it won't feed back as much. And
can I ask the stupid trumpet player band director question?
Sure.
How do you access the inside of that? Do you just is there actually a way to do that, or you just shove it in?
Here, I just stuffed it in.
Okay.
I just big sheets of foam and stuffed it in through these little F holes here. Okay. And it's only because when I was with my amplifier, whenever I let go of the strings, they would just sympathetic vibrations would start screeching, howling feedback. And it's just one of those problems that you have in amplification that a solid body guitar doesn't really have. So yeah, you can stuff it with some foam and kind of fix that. But yeah, amplifiers. Let's talk amps.
I will say, as you're getting set up, this is probably for people who are young jazz band teachers, especially a badly set up amplifier, meaning volume, especially if it's too loud. No matter how swinging your band is, this can completely ruin everything you've done. I mean, the amount of times I've judged a band and I've just said, just turn down the guitar and the bass.
Yeah, because then it's all you can hear, right?
Right. And I it's just going for the acoustic sound is obviously kind of the high level way to do it. Just making sure that it blends and doesn't cover up your horn section.
There's a couple of ways of doing that. Sometimes guitar players don't know how loud they are. You've probably seen many guitar players, I'm going to step away from a little bit, standing like this and playing right where my amp is. So that amplifier is blasting at their ankles. They have no idea how loud they are because their ears aren't down there. So it may be a good idea to tilt the amplifier back a little bit or get one of those amp stands that you can put your amp in the stand and then angle it toward your guitar player because he wants to hear himself, right? Your guitar player wants to hear himself. But if the amp is just flat on the stage and it's right next to his foot, he's not hearing himself. So you can also move it back, move it way back, move it like 10 feet back. The sound will come out. Everyone will hear it, but he'll have a better idea of how he fits in the mix that way.
Yeah, I was always taught to imagine an ice cream cone of sound, right, coming out, and then make sure you're in that sound and you're at least 3 or 4 feet from the amp, right? So you're not covering it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I've also had some people who put that and the bass amp behind the drummer, behind the entire rhythm section. So then like the drummer can hear you and the bass can hear it and all that. So, it's the basic concept of making sure you're in that cone of sound.
Right. Yeah. And the only thing that's a downside of that is that you don't have control over the volume with your hands, but you can use the volume on your instrument, and that's just fine. So directors should definitely experiment with that.
I also learned something last year that I didn't know, that the longer the patch cable, like the more problems there can be.
Yes. I wouldn't go any longer than 20 feet. When you do a microphone cable, an XLR cable, there's 3 strands of wire in there, and there's a way that uh, the noise gets canceled out. We can get into that, but we don't have to. The noise will get canceled out because there's 3 strands of wire in there. On an instrument cable, there's only 2. So it is susceptible to noise the longer the run is with an instrument cable. It can be a problem. So I do like to keep the cables less than 20 feet. 10 is better.
This is funny. I was like, I'm almost like bragging at the moment. I don't mean it, but the last year we had Winton come to our school, right? And it was just like this last minute thing, and it happened. And of course, we have like a second bass player who's playing at the moment, like not even our top player. And he's playing, and he's getting the crackling and like all the things that we always deal with. And Winton's always like, man, the shorter the cable, the better, because he said the longer it is, the more issues. And I was like, I didn't even ever think of that.
Yeah. You also have to take care of them. You have to put them away and don't let people step on them. And
so that's one of those. I just want to say that's one of those things as band directors too. I always need more cables. Like I almost feel like I never have enough of those 1/4-inch cables. Just get another 6 or 7 and just have them in a closet somewhere, because
you never know when you're going to need a new one. Absolutely.
So can we talk basic setup for amps, like for someone who knows nothing?
The short version is that amps have been designed to sound good when everything is in the middle. So I'm going to pull up one of these Tech 21 units right now and kind of turn this on for you and have you have a look. I know some of you are listening in the car at home, but basically you're going to see that you have a high, a mid, and a low. Those 3 knobs are your equalizer. So start with those at the 12 o'clock position. For volume, start by turning it all the way down, and you'll probably have another knob called gain or drive or something like that. So because you have 2 volume knobs, one of them is the master volume. That's the one that will say like volume or level. The other one is going to be the preamp section, or the part that's going to give you some distortion. So if the gain is up higher than the master volume, you'll get distortion. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. So you probably want to keep the gain a little lower and the master volume a little higher. That way you'll get a clean sound. If you reverse it and the preamp section is overdriving the power amp section, you'll get distortion.
Okay.
Yeah. So some amps have 2 channels, and you have a little button where you can switch from your clean channel to your distorted channel. So that can be a cool thing too. But basic stuff, the most knobs on there are the middle, the high, and the bass. I like to start with those in the middle. Now, you want to stay out of the way of the bass player. So rolling back the bass a little bit can help create a little bit more room. Instead of turning the volume up, a lot of band directors do that right away when they can't hear the guitar. You can just turn up the treble, because if you add more high frequencies, it will cut through the mix better. And really that's what you want to do. You want to cut through the mix. You don't just want to be louder. So playing with those EQ knobs to create a good sound that cuts through the mix, and then seasoning to taste with whatever gain and volume you want to play with. Reverb, when you're playing in an auditorium, most amps have a reverb control. You probably don't need a lot, because the room itself is going to provide a certain amount of reverb. And if you want to sound with the ensemble, you don't want to have a special effect on your instrument that no one else has in the ensemble. So reverb sparingly. It sounds great on its own, but it won't really blend well unless everybody's kind of on the same boat.
Can I jump in as the guitar dummy here in the room for a second? Sure. As someone with a lot of experience, if you're a band director and you don't know much about guitar, and somebody comes in and says, I play guitar, and they jump in your jazz band, odds are they're more of a rock player. Like it's very rare you come in and somebody's like actually a hip jazz player, like, wake me up, I'm dreaming. But typically that student plays with too much. So if they come in with a rock sound, you're like, I don't know what it is, but it just doesn't sound right.
Right. First thing you do is you throw that neck pickup on.
Yeah.
That's number 1. Then you take the tone control on the guitar and roll it back a little bit. That'll take some of the brightness out of it. Then you go to the amp, make sure that you have your treble, your mid, and your bass all at the 12 o'clock position. Any distortion knobs that you see, turn those down. and bring your volume up to the level that you're going to need to be heard in your ensemble. And then you can decide if your guitar isn't cutting very well through the mix, maybe add a little treble, maybe add a little mid in the EQ. I've not really found any situations where I need to add too much bass to a guitar, because I like to make sure that if I have a bass player in the band, he's covering the bass area. I'm going to represent that connective tissue between the bass and the harmony on top, right? So in a jazz setting, the bass guitar really is part of the bass drum, the kick drum, right? They do the same thing. There's like that feathering on the bass drum that's so common in jazz bands these days. The guitar really is more like the ride cymbal. So if you have a bass and a guitar playing together, you'll get that chime and sparkle out of the guitar that's going to give you just those harmony notes. The next thing that, you know, if you have this guitar player who comes in probably as a rock player, he's probably playing the roots of all the chords. And that is going to take some practice for him to learn to not play the roots. But I've got a little handout I think I gave you in the show notes that we could talk about a little bit for coming up with some good chord voicings. And you had an excellent episode a couple of weeks ago, your piano player friend who came on and talked about rootless voicings.
Right.
That was
with Jake Sturdivant. I forget the episode number. I think it was 163, 164, kind of in there. I think it's called jazz piano for band directors or something like that.
The same thing applies to guitar.
Yeah.
So you know, we can explore that a little bit too. I can show you how to apply that on the guitar.
I think if people are looking for a separate video on that, you know, what I call them shell voicings.
Yep, that's what they're called. Thirds and sevenths.
Thirds and sevenths, and they're really easy. Again, as a trumpet player, I can play some basic shell voicings, and yeah, it's really worth. I also will say, as a non-guitar player who needs to teach just enough guitar for my jazz program, I don't really teach guitar in any other way. For me, I have to take the guitar home and just sit with it, and then look at the YouTube video and try it myself. If I can do it myself, then I know I can help my student do it. But if I have to take that hands-on approach ahead of time and go, okay, we're doing this tune, I have a brand new guitar player. If I can't figure out how to play these chord changes, I know this kid isn't going to be able to.
Correct.
Right. So
less is more. That's another Jeff Smith thing too.
Let's circle back to the amps, because I don't think we talked fully about models or anything like that.
Oh, my favorite amp to recommend to band directors across the country is the Roland Jazz Chorus 40. I've got one right back there. You can get one for around $600, and it's two 10-inch speakers. It will make a fantastic jazz amp, but it will also do rock and roll. It has enough bells and whistles in it where you'll get some satisfying modern band sounds out of it. The thing I like about it the most is that it's a solid state amplifier and it's durable. They're light and they sound great. Now, right next to it over there, I have a tube amplifier. And if you ask a lot of guitar players, you know, what's the best amp to get for my program, a lot of them will recommend an amplifier that's vacuum tubes and not transistors, the old school. And, you know, they're right. Those amps sound fantastic. There's a warmth to them that's just unmatched by transistor amplifiers. However, when you buy a tube amp, you have to be prepared for some maintenance. Those tubes don't last forever. They have to warm up. You have to hit the power switch and then wait a little bit and then hit the standby switch and let it warm up. There will be some cracking and popping. They can be noisy and temperamental. Those tubes are glass. So if you're going to take your band on the road, you basically got light bulbs in the back of your amplifier that can break at any time. And
good luck.
Right. Good luck. But yeah, they are better sounding amplifiers. But I strongly recommend for band directors who are just going to, you know, maybe have an amplifier that accidentally gets left on over the weekend. You want a transistor amplifier, a solid state. And the Roland Jazz Chorus 40 definitely ticks all the boxes for me.
Okay.
There is another option. When you were listening to me play the Telecaster before and the Squier and the other electric guitars, I was not plugged into an amplifier at all. I was plugged into an amp modeler, and these are becoming increasingly more popular. The ones I like are the Tech 21 fly rigs, and they make a bunch of these. Now I have 6 of these at my school. Right now I'm plugged into the RK5 fly rig, and I can get clean sounds out of it. I can get distorted sounds out of it. It has effects like a digital delay. It has reverb. It also has a tuner built in. on the floor. These things are light. They are, I think this is 16, maybe, what's it? Maybe 14 inches long and maybe 3 inches wide.
Like a big ruler.
It's like a big ruler, yeah, and it has a 1/4 inch output for instrument cables, but it also has an XLR output too. So you can run directly into a PA system with this, and you can record with it. And they're tiny. My pep band plays at the home football games. We just bring a small mixing board and 2 speakers out there, 2 PA speakers. And then I have my bass player has one of these. I've got 3 guitar players. They have these too. And then the keyboard goes direct as well. So I find these Tech 21 fly rigs to be just fantastic for doing what they do. If I had a pep band that each kid needed an amplifier, right? That amplifier, that jazz chorus that I recommended, that's a $600 amp. You could get 2 of these for the price of one of those.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if your school already has a PA system, these are designed, these Tech 21 fly rigs are designed to go into a PA system. That's what they're meant to do. And you get all the fun toys, including the tuner, which is very handy.
Cool.
And since we're all going through the PA system, right, I can turn the master volume down and suddenly all the kids are quiet. That's really cool.
That's sweet. That's sweet.
That degree of control.
Yeah.
I find kids will come to school sometimes with those practice amplifiers. You've probably seen those. They're about 8 inches wide by 8 inches tall. They have one tiny little speaker in there. And the kid will tell you, the first thing they'll tell you is, hey, it gets really loud. And they're right. It can get really loud, but very much like, trumpet in the screaming register loud gets, it's not the most pleasant kind of loud. There's no what they call headroom. So those amplifiers that I have back there, they're going to sound great when the volume is on like 2 or 3. You'll never bring one of those amplifiers up to like 10, ever, unless you're Jimi Hendrix. And even then, right, that's a special case. So avoid those little practice amplifiers. They're good for practicing at home, or for if you have a guitar workshop and you're testing guitars that are on a bench and you're trying to make sure the pickups work and you need something small to run them through. Those practice amps are good for that. But I would never gig with a little practice amp. My default is it has to be at least a 10-inch speaker, at least. Yep. 12-inch speaker is better. So this Roland Jazz Chorus that I recommend, have a good day. You all done in there? Okay. The Roland Jazz Chorus that I recommend is 2 10-inch speakers, and I have a hand-wired, that's a Carr Vincent. It's got a 12-inch speaker, and that's a tube amp.
Okay.
In college, I played a Fender 1965 Twin Reverb. It was a 1993 reissue of that, and that thing was so heavy. I think it weighed 80 pounds. It was horrible to start carrying around. So to look for an amplifier. If you want an amplifier for your guitar program, look for something with a solo, like a single 12-inch speaker, or look for something with 2 10-inch speakers. That'll get you where you need to be.
Great. Can we get into a little bit of just some kind of quick practical things for people who are teaching jazz band and they have a guitar player? Kind of have a quick lineup here.
Sure.
Okay. So the role of the guitar player in jazz band. Let's talk about Freddie Green. Freddie Green was a famous guitar player for the Count Basie band, and he's the one who played the short quarter notes on the beat, slightly accenting 2 and 4, even though I saw Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra thing where they're like, actually, they talked about more 1 and 3 than 2 and 4. And I was kind of like, my mind was blown and I kind of shut it off. But it was I'm sure it was right. I just wasn't able to hear it at the time. But the short Freddie Green quarter notes is a great way to kind of stay out of the way of the other rhythm section players. Right. It should line up right with the bass, only the bass is long quarter notes and the guitar is short quarter notes.
Right. So I like to be on the hi-hat side of the drum set so I can feel the time a little better, but I do try to represent what's going on in the ride cymbal. Mm-hmm. So if you have that ta 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 ta, that's really where you're. And what I'm doing here is I'm just doing like blues and F changes. So I've got the classic voicing is on the A string. I'm on the note F with my second finger, and so that's the 8th fret. And then on the D string, I got my first finger on A, and on the G string, I have E flat. Those 3 notes together. Now I don't need the root, but I use the root for reference so I know where I am. And most beginning guitar players will need that. They're like, I'm playing an F chord, there should be an F in it, right? So you can visualize it, but you don't have to play it. So I just lifted my finger off of that note. And the tip of my second finger is just brushing against the A string. So in case my pick does hit the A string, it's muted. And that's the shell voicing right there that you were talking about, those two notes. So I've got my second finger is kind of draping across, not playing the root note, and muting the other notes. And I'm just applying pressure. I can hit the notes and let them ring. And then when I let go with my fingers, the notes will stop, right? So I didn't mute the strings there with my hand. I just let pressure go and the notes stopped. You can also get to your 4 chord, like you said in your piano episode, by moving those two notes down a half step. Now the root is here. It's on the E string, but again, I'm not playing the root. So, and then back up to F. Then if I go up another half step, that's the C chord. There's your 5 chord. So I can do a whole blues just like that. Those two notes.
I love that. For people who are like new to I remember teaching for 3 or 4 years before I learned this. Like if you have your kids play thirds and sevenths, when you move across the blues, you don't have to move them around. You're right. You can move down and up in half steps, and that covers everything you need to know.
You can do turnarounds with it too, like the whole sorry, that's G minor. I just played the D string and the G string. The D string and the G string all the way through. And when I walked it down, I played G7 by accident. So G minor is the 2 chord, C7. So that's the only time I broke that tritone shape.
But again, anybody with like a sense of being able to sit and do that. And again, that's why I think either this video or YouTube videos are great. Sit in front of it with your guitar on your Lazy Boy or whatever, and like literally work through it so that you can help. And in fact, one time my band was doing Blues in the Closet, the great Mark Taylor chart on that classic tune, but I had a brand new guitar player. But I knew that. So I didn't give him the actual guitar part. Like there's no way he could function on that. I literally wrote out a guitar part, and I had like the number of like the frets and like all that written below, so he could do it in the most basic way, but it sounded just like that.
Yep, absolutely. Another thing, sometimes those charts will go extension crazy, right? You'll get an E7 sharp 9 with a you can leave those out. A13 sharp or A flat 13 flat 9. You don't need to play all that. So to the beginning guitar player, recognize those chords with all those odd extensions as just dominant 7th chords and play the shell. And then when they get comfortable with it, try adding one of those extensions.
And especially the piano player, if the piano player is playing the same chord, they're covering those extra notes. And if you're playing along with the band, there's a good chance the band has some of those notes too.
Absolutely. The band chart came first. I think the rhythm section stuff is really just an afterthought, those voicings. You're playing the voicings that the horns are playing. So if there's a sharp 9 in there or a flat 9, chances are a saxophone or a trombone has it, and you don't need to play it. It does tell you, though, don't play the natural 9, right? If you're playing a D7 chord and it says D7 flat 9, I would avoid the natural 9. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, as long as they know whether it's a minor or a major chord. Right.
A
minor 7 or a dominant 7, then
or a major 7, right? So then you can play. So
can we talk about when to play? Say you're in a rhythm section and you've got your drums and your bass, but most importantly, your piano player. Like, what are some ways where you can make sure we're not all talking over each other?
Well, one of the things that I can do better than a piano player does is this. That punchy sort of, a piano can do it, but it doesn't have the same brightness and attack to it. So I've always liked it when the piano player is doing things like it's sustaining, right? I like it when a piano will play their chords and it just kind of fades out, and they can dance around with coming up with rhythms. And when I'm more strict, that way our rhythms don't clash, and one of us is floating and one of us is just driving, right? Tick, tick, those patterns are great. You can also trade off choruses. You can decide that, hey, when the sax solo comes around, lets everybody drop out except the piano player. So it's bass, piano, sax player is playing his solo. And now maybe if the sax player takes a second chorus, or on the last chorus or the shout chorus, let's now bring in the guitar. Or you can switch it around and just say, okay, first chorus that someone's playing a solo, the piano drops out, it's just going to be guitar. And that texture change is subtle, but it's effective.
Yeah. I would say for most band directors, unless your band is a really high level or those kids are really high level, they should not be both comping on their own at the same time. They should be given, one of them should be like the piano's playing the Charleston rhythm, great. Guitar player can kind of improvise, or vice versa, if they are playing together. If they're good enough, then you can let them both listen and deal with it. But I would say 99% of our bands are not at that level.
Yeah. And harmonically, when you start throwing all those extensions on, you know, your guitar player, all that stuff, there's no room left for anyone if you're starting to throw those crazy extensions in there. But if you're just here, you know, they have to kind of find joy in that. And it may not be a very rock and roll thing. I had a student teacher once who was a tuba player, and I asked her, so what made you want to play the tuba, right? I mean, those parts aren't any fun. You don't get the melody. And she's like, if I have to explain that to you, you don't understand the tuba. And that really resonated with me. I'm like, yeah, you're the big support. You create that wonderful, lush foundation that the harmony rests on, right? And you do that exceptionally well. So as guitar players, that makes me happy. I mean, we're driving along, and you had said earlier about the accenting on 2 and 4. Some of the listeners may not have caught that, but if we're doing 1, 2, 3, right? That I find is very effective. I don't know if I would accent on 1 and 3 as much.
It was with a specific style of traditional jazz where the 4 quarter notes were more equal rather than the heavy. And I don't remember what it was. So I wouldn't.
Maybe closer to a Dixieland. Maybe closer to a Dixieland. But Freddie Green was your guy. He was kind of the master of those 2-note, little 3-note voicings that are very closely aligned, I think, to the ride cymbal.
Beautiful. Brian, well, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic session. If people want to reach out to you and get more detailed information about their exact situation or with questions, how can they do that?
My email address is Rabuse. That's the letter B as in boy, RABUSE at CBRSD, those Central Berkshire Regional School District.org.
Beautiful. Or they could probably find you on Facebook too.
They can probably find me on Facebook too.
Yeah. Brian, thanks so much.
My pleasure, Kyle.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.